2006. And tell us what you've been doing and how many times they tried to throw you out of that kind of stuff.
Sure. It didn't come to that early on, but I started reporting on the UN, as you said, in 2006, and Inner City Press had pre-existed it. That's what I write for. It's called innercitypress.com. It was covering the Bronx. It still covers fair lending by banks or the lack thereof. But I started covering the UN, and I found that I really liked it. So by about 2007 or 8, I started coming in almost every day. They have every day. Almost every day there's a noon briefing. There's a lot of committee meetings. Today I'm covering the Security Council, although I stepped into this booth that I can explain. As I got to know more about the UN, I started having more troubles in the sense that they didn't mind. They called me the first blogger. They thought it was sort of cute to have somebody covering all the committees and running. They'd always say, like, what's the scandal? What's the rumors? But it turns out a lot of the scandals are actually true. And I'd say in the last about year and a half, as I started reporting on this John Ash, Anglap saying there was a bribery scandal at the current UN, which, again, I'm not anti-UN, and I don't think that the UN has to have scandals, but I think because of the impunity and the lack of kind of legal oversight, and because the countries that are supposed to oversee it are mostly just trying to, get whatever they can out of it, whether it's jobs or lack of scrutiny for what they're doing, there's not a lot of oversight. And so I have found quite a bit of irregularities, let's say. And the more that I find, the more harshly they treat me, such that this year, after covering it for almost basically 10 years, they ordered me out on 2 hours' notice, and they ordered me out of my office and threw my files in the street in April. Since then, I've come back in, but I have to have a minder if I go anywhere on the second floor. So, strange as that might sound, I have a minder.
Sure.
Yes, I do. I'm not unlike all the other reporters here that I've been my, I guess, colleagues during this time. Anytime I want to go and cover the General Assembly, I have to get an escort. And then somebody to take me down the hall as if now I'm suddenly like a dangerous person. These people will actually say to me, like, who is it that you want to interview? And I said, I'm trying to report on the member states' dissatisfaction with Ban Ki-moon on a variety of issues, whether it's human rights and I really can't do it with Ban Ki-moon's minder standing next to me, asking me who I want to speak to. It's really surreal. I'm not kidding you. This is what it's come to.
Oh, wait a minute. Has the American permanent mission to the United Nations been made aware of this?
Interesting that you ask.
And protect you?
I didn't reach out to them because I don't feel that you should have to have. Just as I don't feel you should have a minder, I don't think you should have to have a protector or a sponsor to be a journalist at the UN. But I will say that a group in Washington that you may have heard of called the Government Accountability Project, they protect whistleblowers. They took up the case of Mr. Compass, who was kind of a famous UN whistleblower, and some others. They wrote to the U.S. mission, not to cement the power. That might have been a mistake. They wrote to the Deputy Ambassador for Management and Reform, Isabel Coleman. I believe she's an academic as well, but the other thing I believe is that she didn't do anything on this, nothing. And it's sort of, we can get into that, I think that the current administration, for many good things that you can say about it domestically, in terms of UN oversight, they're not there because they want to be seen as being good multilateralists and as being, playing well with others, so that, I think that they just assumed if Ban Ki-moon threw Inner City Press in the street, there must be a reason. So I haven't found a lot of... I know you may have even heard of this, because I know that you've covered Darfur. My best contact in the mission is now leaving the mission, David Pressman. He was the deputy ambassador. He used to work with Clooney and them. Very nice guy, but, without violating any confidences, he seemed to say, everything's up to Isabel Coleman. There's only so much I can do. He thought, I think she would do something, and she did nothing. So it's ironic to me that and the thing with the U.S. is like, I was here actually at the tail end of Bolton and all of that stuff. The U.S. was too anti-UN when I first got here, but we may disagree on this. They've become too pro-UN. They're unwilling to criticize the UN meaningfully on things like sexual abuse by peacekeepers. They keep applauding the Secretary General. He's done nothing. The rapes have just continued. For example, on Haiti cholera, the UN by mistake brought cholera to Haiti, killed a lot of people. The U.S. should be holding. It has Haitian American citizens, but they haven't held his feet to the fire. All I hear is congratulations to Ban Ki-moon for the U.S. mission. So I think the pendulum. There's probably a right middle ground, which is criticizing where necessary and defending and praising where necessary. But we haven't. The U.S. mission since I've been here hasn't found that sweet spot.
Oh wow. because the students in this course, they write essays on exactly where they stand on pro or anti-UN, and they found a kind of a middle ground. They're ready to work with you on that whole project.
I mean, exactly. It does. It's not either or. I think it's strange. I think what it is that the defenders of the UN, they became kind of traumatized by the Bush and Bolton era, so that they thought that any criticism of it could spin out of control and call all of these good things into question. And so they too routinely and too religiously, so to speak, defend the UN, even when it's engaged in. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, the peacekeeping thing. It's easy to say zero tolerance and to congratulate Ban Ki-moon for a zero tolerance policy, but it doesn't exist currently. If peacekeepers go to the field, Central African Republic, commit rapes, even on children, the most the UN can do is to send them back home. There's not even a commitment to block their country from continuing to make money off peacekeeping if they don't prosecute child rapists. So there really is no zero tolerance. It's not surprising when you create a legal regime in which the greatest repercussion for child rape is repatriation, like we'll send you back home, that these things occur. Now, do they occur for all peacekeepers? Not at all. But it's predictable. You could predict it if you don't close this loophole of punishment, that it's going to happen, and it continues to happen.
Wow, yes, I knew there are students in this course who are most interested in that. I also know some journalists that are interested in it. There's one, Gina Moore, who's
sure. BuzzFeed.
She's quite interested in that. She's actually a close friend of my daughter in Ethiopia right now. Anyway, Gina's going to Germany, though. She's changing her assignment.
But let's say here's a kind of a more difficult. I mean, it's easy to beat up on it. Maybe your students have heard of what's happened, not just South Sudan writ large, but say this one specific incident. I don't want to focus only on aid workers, because the people of South Sudan have been getting mishandled for years. First by Sudan, then by Machar and Kiir. But it happened the day that the Terrain Hotel was breached, July 11th. I was sitting. I managed to slip away from my minder. I don't have to have a minder in the briefing room. And somebody that I knew was actually sent me video of somebody in the Terrain Hotel pleading, it wasn't like the person wasn't being killed. They were in their sort of safe room before it was breached. But in real time, I asked the UN, what are you going to do? And they're like, oh, we haven't heard about that. The reality is now basically the UN has taken to kind of covering up for the troop contributing countries that didn't bother to go out of the base. They've said, well, there was a communication problem. Perfect example is they've said, people told me that the UN peacekeepers used tear gas on IDPs during that incident, on unarmed IDPs, basically South Sudanese women. And instead of just admitting that they did it and saying, we'll do better, or here's our, they used this incredible phrase. The UN said that there had been an accidental tear gas incident. And now, only because some NGO pursued it, did they admit that they used tear gas but to protect their people, and they still won't release their report. So it has no credibility, And on that.
Yeah, well, that's exactly one of the questions that has come up on this whole, the history of efforts at reform and things like that, proposals to do that, proposals to hold peacekeeping troops responsible, all that kind of stuff just doesn't seem to go anywhere. I mean, that capacity to do it, capacity to reform seems to be really weak. Another person that I've got to know is Aisha Basri, who did the sort of expose on UNAMID, so forth there. Anyway, and the response to that was allegedly an investigation and alleged reform. But how did it look from your side of it?
No, absolutely. What happens so often in the UN is that the whistleblower, it really does happen, gets maligned. So I know even some well-meaning people I know in the UN are like, oh, El Basri, she actually UNAMID. I'm not trying to badmouth her. I'm trying to say that her critique didn't really hit the mark. And someone here, I'll say this is what I've come to believe in this, and it may just be, you can look into it. The head of UN peacekeeping, I think bears a lot of there's no accountability. France has run UN peacekeeping for 20 years in a row. I'm not saying that it's right or it's wrong. They have a lot of former colonies in Africa. It seems to be a bit of a conflict of interest to be running the peacekeepers in Cote d'Ivoire and Central African Republic and Mali. Maybe they're the P5 that's most interested in it. But to also control the top job. Now, you mentioned, I think, when you were contacting me, Jean-Marie Gagnon. I was here when he was here. He seems like a pretty credible guy. He's a thinker. He's an academic. He's with Crisis Group. The current guy, Hervé Ladsus, maybe the simplest way I can say it to reveal my conflict of interest, he's refused to answer my questions for 4 years now. When he first came in, I dared ask him whether his history in the Great Lakes as France's deputy ambassador during the Rwandan genocide might be something he'd want to address, dealing with the same exact region as head of peacekeeping. And he refused. He refused on camera. You can find this on the Inner City Press website and on the UN website. He says, "I don't answer your questions, sir." And nobody here did anything. The head of Ban Ki-moon didn't say, "I expect my commissioners to at least answer questions." I started saying at that time, if you don't think you have to answer my question, I guess you should throw me out. I mean, it's either like you answer media questions or you don't. But I guess they did throw me out. Recently I tried to ask him a question in the hallway, and they gave me a big problem. They said, "You can't ask questions in the hall." I said, "I see other journalists doing it all the time." They said, "Well, they're doing it by invitation." This is the UN in a nutshell. You have to be invited. The thing is that the questions they invite are ludicrous. They literally are. And I hate to say it, I'm going to go one step up the chain. I know Ban Ki-moon is leaving. I don't like to kick a dog when he's down or on the way out, although he's not down. He's going to run for president of South Korea. He went to D.C. on Friday, right? Now today's Tuesday, so it's recent. He gave a speech to the Society of Korean Americans in the Ronald Reagan International Trade Center, big place right by Pennsylvania Avenue. And I asked for a transcript, just like, as you know, people ask in the presidential campaigns. And they said no. They said it was a private event. Why is he with a big screen behind him? Why does he have UN bodyguards, a UN vehicle? And they said, well, you have to ask the organizers. I said, was money charged for it? I mean, is it permissible for UN? I just have never heard anything with it, because I'm on, for example, I see when President Obama goes to a fundraiser in Manhattan, they release a transcript even of a totally private. He's gone far off the tracks with the UN.
So wait a minute. Look, Matt, I'm supposed to figure that the reason we haven't heard of you,
go ahead.
We've heard of Greg Palast, and we've heard of Jeremy Scahill,
sure,
and we've heard of those famous investigative reporters, is that the Americans don't
care about the UN.
Don't want anybody to hear about you.
I don't want to. That would be an easy. It's a nice story. I think it's true. I think I care about the UN, but I notice a lot of the stuff I get over the transom are like, I cover Burundi, I cover like Ethiopia, Eritrea. There are a lot of places, and I don't really mind that at all. There are a lot of places on earth where the UN is. I mean, look. The U.S. could take or leave the UN, right? Honestly, whether there's a difference between the parties, some people want to use it to multilateralism and it's cheaper peacekeeping than the Marines and all of that. But ultimately, despite black helicopter rumors to the contrary, it doesn't have a big impact on the U.S. Whereas in countries like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, for the longest, the UN had the biggest air force. It's the only one that could fly from Kinshasa to Goma. Before I ran into my problems here, I went on one of these Security Council trips. It's a beautiful, absolutely beautiful place. But the UN is in a position above the presidency. I think that's why, actually, in some of these countries, Joseph Kabila wants to stay in power, so he wants to throw the UN so there's not observers. But I think also there is a sense of there can even be UN colonialism or the use of the UN for colonialism. I see a lot of peacekeeping is that way. But there is a certain look at Haiti. Haiti is tragic. The UN, mistakenly, admittedly, negligently, not intentionally, brought cholera in. They killed 10,000 people. They didn't pay anybody anything. People aren't like money grabbers, but if you lose your breadwinner and you're evicted from your home and your kids can't get schooling, if Coca-Cola had brought cholera, they would have had to pay. The UN didn't pay anything. And the worst, there's a stray press freedom issue. I was thrown out of a meeting about cholera on Friday. But down in Haiti, Ban Ki-moon went to Haiti, and probably most of the stories that you saw were looters. Looters were near him. They looted. They're Haitians looting. And it's like, the reality is a lot of those were just protesters saying, you killed our people, you did nothing. And you know what they got for their trouble of protesting? They got tear gassed by the UN. There's footage you can find of a guy on a small moped trying to drive his baby to get cleaned off of UN tear gas. So that's unacceptable.
Wow. Now wait a minute. Look, there's a couple of other questions here. We did ask Linda Fazzulo about you.
Sure.
And she was rather positive about you.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah, she didn't call you some kind of gossip-mongering, irresponsible, crazy nut,
right.
dropout, this kind of stuff. They really do that anyway.
I'm glad to hear it. But I could say more. Go ahead. I'd rather answer your question.
Why haven't you got more protectors or more stuff? I don't get this.
Okay, I'll try to.
The site is 2011
Yeah.
on the New Yorker. That's it.
I'll try. Oh, okay. Do you mean coverage? I actually want. It's a more. I have to do this kind of diplomatically, but it is a house of diplomacy. Now, you would expect if a journalist was being attacked by the UN, that journalists, the Correspondents Association, would spring to its defense. This hasn't happened, and it may be in part my personality, but it may also be. Here's another thing. I mean, and I'll acknowledge that. To do this kind of work, you're not like you can be a little abrasive, whatever, no problem. But I've always, at one point I was a part of that group, the UN Correspondents Association. In fact, I was a vice president of it. I had a falling out with them when, and maybe I get too close to these issues, they screened a movie, basically a Sri Lanka war crimes defense. I said, why wasn't I asked? I'm on the board. It turned out that the then and now president of the organization, he owns a lot of real estate. He'd rented an apartment to the Sri Lankan ambassador under a previous job for the UN, and then screened his movie without telling anyone about it. So I wrote a story. I said, I said, my readers have a right to know why this movie was inside the UN, because although to you and I, in Sri Lanka, the UN at that time was a big deal, because the idea is that the UN could either charge them with war crimes or let them off the hook. And this story, that the movie was inside the UN, was viewed as a big thing. Same thing when Ban Ki-moon accepted a Sri Lankan general, essentially a war criminal. And if he wants to bring suit, bring it on. Shrivendra Silva, who commanded a unit that shelled hospitals in the final stage in Sri Lanka, he made him a UN peacekeeping advisor. So, yeah, so I've ended up, things sort of went south from there. I now have essentially believe it's legitimate to cover the role, not the press corps as a whole, but the Correspondents Association played a role in this Eng Lap Sang, John Ash bribery scandal. I don't know if your class has looked into it, but it's a very telling case in which a Macau-based businessman threw a lot of money around, not only to the former president of the General Assembly, but also to a media here that's called South News. It's right in the court. It's right in the prosecution papers that he set up a fake media for $12 million to basically buy entree into the UN. So I said, well, wait a second. This thing was part of UNCA. You took money from this group for a full table and gave the businessman a photo with Ban Ki-moon. Is it true? Could it be that the media is selling access to Ban Ki-moon and getting access to Ban Ki-moon in exchange for not criticizing him? That's basically my critique would be, is that the majority, not all, but a certain portion of the press corps here is too close to the UN and says things like, what are we going to do about Somalia? I mean, I care as much about Somalia as the next person, but I'm not working for the UN. I'm a journalist. I cover the UN. If I want to do, as a journalist, help Somalia, I'm going to try to make sure the UN doesn't steal their money or their coastline. But when you start saying, are we going to deploy, there's no checks and balances. The member states aren't watching the UN. There's no court oversight of the UN. And if if the press corps gets in bed with the UN, then you might as well turn the lights off.
Yeah, well, we're getting kind of a feeling where it's a little murky right now.
Yeah, it is. I mean, so I've tried to pull back. I'm almost happy, not happy, but things were getting so bad. I mean, I can, very petty, but very nasty stuff. I'll be periscoping a meeting, somebody pushes my arm down, somebody cut off my question at the stakeout and said, journalist first. Right? There's this whole idea that if you actually care about what you're reporting on, you're not really a journalist. Even if you have sources, even if you have documents and leaks. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I quit UNCA and I started a group, this is what I would like your students to look at, called FUNCA. It's called FUNCA. The F is not what you think it is. It's the Free UN Coalition for Access. And it's saying that the UN should have a Freedom of Information Act. Funka.info. You can find the website. It's just saying this is what a press group should be. It should be fighting for access. It should be fighting for open meetings, open documents, and not trying to have. I mean, you know what they're doing? They're doing a photo exhibit with Ban Ki-moon. Ban Ki-moon will attend it to see photos about how great he's doing. The photo I have of him is sidling up to war criminals in Sri Lanka. That's the photograph I took. I mean, there's some other photographs too, but you shouldn't be, I think, like raising on a pedestal the people you're trying to cover. Once you're doing that, you should become a PR person, I think.
Wow. How about Kofi Annan? What about him?
I only caught the tail end of him, and I knew a lot of the journalists. See, the amount of coverage of the UN, it's not just me, the amount of coverage has gone down. When I first got here, there was a guy from the London Times called James Bone. You may not know him. He was a very aggressive journalist. Kofi Annan called him an overgrown schoolboy, but he went to the briefing every day, and he asked questions. And a lot of people that I knew at that time thought Kofi Annan was very corrupt. Not very corrupt. They were talking about oil for food. I didn't really understand it fully. I will say this: the UN was a lot more prominent at the time. He was very articulate, right? It was. I mean, I know that the people that thought he thought he was a secular pope and all. I've read all the critiques, but I think that the UN has really become a backwater since I've been here. I mean, CNN used to be here every day. They're here once a week now, right? The LA Times had a bureau. They don't have one anymore. And in part, maybe it's that the UN itself hasn't solved a political problem in the last 10 years. Maybe it's because Ban Ki-moon is just. He claims he has a different leadership style that's Asian, that's like water. That's supposedly what he said at this private speech trying to run for president of South Korea. But I don't think it's served very well, and I'm very interested to see whether Guterres, he's not going to be Kofi Annan, but he's not going to be Ban Ki-moon either. Just even in hearing the speech he gave in the GA, I'm not going to be obsequious, and I may get thrown out of the building again. But at least it's a fresh start, and I think, maybe because he's a former head of state, because he kind of speaks a number of languages clearly, and I'm trying to be careful here, but I know people that ask me to translate Ban Ki-moon for them. Like, whatever.
Right. Well, wait a minute. Okay, so we don't know about the terrorists. What's the actual story? Because we've been trying to, with a group who's been trying to get action on the Amnesty International report about poison gas in Jebel Nara.
Yep.
And then spent most of the weekend and most of last Friday working with various people on that. And so, but I'm interested exactly in what the story we heard from Mukesh Kapila, that kind of a whistle for himself.
Oh, I know him.
That everything is kind of frozen while people get ready. Do they have to submit their resignations for Guterres to come in? Yeah,
I've asked that, and there's nothing in writing, but yeah, they're supposed to. And I think it's pretty well known not only that Ladsus will go, but that France may this time lose peacekeeping. They may lose it to China, or they may lose it to China may take DFS, if you know that, like the Department of Field Support, and the U.S. might take DPKO, or China could take the whole thing, which I'm sure that you don't think will mean a very fulsome investigation. Ask yourself what Ladsus has done. If you know Darfur, then you know Tabet, where under Ladsus they sent in investigators of rapes who said there were no rapes, and it turns out they'd been surrounded by minders the whole time. So. Right. Anybody, I swear to God, we could find a better U.S. chief for peacekeeping from China than Ladsus is. But, yeah, there's going to be turnover. There's also a lot of talk of what, I hate, and I say this with all respect to the new Secretary General, what deal may or may not have been cut to not get a veto or a discourage. And so, I wrote a story where I've basically started naming not just Eastern Europeans, but even Russian officials that the Department of Political Affairs. Right now it's held by the U.S. It's widely thought here that Russia will take that post.
Isn't the one that Pressman has, or is he already?
No, Pressman is at the U.S. mission. Feldman, it's a really blurry thing. The current head of the UN Department of Political Affairs is Jeffrey Feltman, who used to be the Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle East, who's totally in fact, here's the great thing, and this is maybe in terms of UN reform a key point. There is no Freedom of Information Act for the UN, okay? It's all public money. There is no right to get any document from them. You may get some, and you may have sources, but there's no process even. And Ban Ki-moon has blamed it on the GA, but that's a fraud, because the Secretariat could itself say, we have this procedure to ask for, and they never did it. But because of the State Department has, releasing all those Hillary Clinton documents, in way back, not the leaks, actual FOIA responses about a year ago, they released one in which Feltman, already working for the UN, wrote back to the State Department and said, here's what my Lebanon guy is saying, Derek Plumley, who is a UK official representing the UN in Lebanon, and Feltman is just mass forwarding it to his former employers. So I asked in a noon briefing, I said, is this correct? I thought when you're a UN official, you work for the UN, you cut your ties with your country. And I was told, no, to do his job, he has to be in touch with the whole P5. I said, so is he forwarding things to Russia and China? I don't think so. So this is why countries want to control departments, because it's a common secret. You get to make decisions. You get to control information. Now that the UN is using drones, ask yourself, who gets the information? My understanding, like it or right, is that all member states are equal. So if you fly a drone over Rwanda has as much right to the information as anybody else. Now, no, they seem to have created a situation where the UN can be a kind of a James Bond character. That would be, if the UN only kept the information for the Secretariat, it would be fine. But if you're giving it to France, you got to give it to all the member states. I don't see any basis to not do that. But there's apparently a lot of unwritten rules about that.
I still don't get this. You have all kinds of information that should have been out there in all kinds of places. You should be raking in royalties.
Again, it could be my personality. It could easily be my personality, but it is. I also like. I'll be honest with you. I go off on tangents. Like the big deal here at the UN right now is Syria. Okay, when you go to a stakeout, that's all anybody wants to ask about. This is it. This is the Super Bowl of UN journalism. And it's not that I don't care about Syria. I just figure, hey, people are sending me stuff about Western Sahara. People are sending me stuff about Burundi. Like I try to hit them where they ain't, or things that wouldn't otherwise be asked about. To me, it's fun. It feels very meaningful, but it's you're sort of seeding the kind of like, my analysis of Syria at the UN. I mean, even Yemen people don't care about, and there's many people being killed by U.S. and U.K. supported bombs, and in some cases American bombs dropped by Saudi planes, and yet Yemen is an afterthought. Yemen is the sort of like sidekick to the Syria issue. It's used even by Russia as kind of to tweak, to say, well, wait a second, if you want a no-fly zone over Aleppo, why not one over Sana'a? I then pursue it, like, yeah, great, like, but nobody meant it. It was all fake. I asked New Zealand, they didn't even answer the question, because France bothers me, because as concerned as they are about Syria, that's fine. They actually hold the pen. They are responsible for Mali, CAR, Burundi. But you ask them questions about it, they don't want to answer. Today they did. I put up some video of the ambassador, but like the foreign minister came through. I asked him about Burundi like 6 times. Finally he had to answer, but it was like pulling teeth. Meanwhile, he just wanted to pontificate about Syria. And you say like, I guess it's that they think they're a very human rightsy country, and this is the Super Bowl of human rights. But what I love about covering the UN is issues, I hate to say it, like I asked about Ethiopia. This is a big deal. It's not. Ethiopia is coming onto the Security Council. They've already said, they don't like me, I'm prejudiced. But as your students may know, there's a massive crackdown taking place. There's been, they've developed a lot, but the majority of the people are sort of held down. They've turned off the internet. Now diplomats are not allowed to travel more than 60 kilometers from the capital.
It isn't trying to post anything on the Facebook in Ethiopia?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, my daughter's been there for 3 years. Right. So I have been interested in Ethiopia, and you're talking about the blocking of news.
And the UN, which has an enormous office there, UN, ECA, Economic Commission on Africa, they don't say anything. Yesterday I asked the spokesman, do you have any comment on restrictions on media and restriction on diplomatic movements in Ethiopia? He said, I'm not really aware of it. And then they sent out a note to correspondents saying we're looking into it. Nothing. It's because, again, maybe they're in a conflict of interest but you then don't, the UN opened up an office in Turkmenistan. We don't hear anything about it. There was a press, again, I'm not one of these beat up the UN guys where it's like, you obviously have to you're not going to deal with angels if you're trying to bring humanitarian aid into Aleppo or elsewhere in Syria. But there's a level, I think that there's a complacency in which UN people say, well, we're doing God's work, so who are you to even ask? Screw you. And it's like, the asking is only going to help the institution, but that's not what they think, and that's why they threw my stuff in the street. And I have minders.
All right, look, we just looked at the Peacekeepers film released in 2005, and twice, as I told you, Meg Carey has talked to this seminar.
Sure.
What happened to her?
She was ousted. She was mysteriously ousted in 2015, I think. You can find it on Inner City Press, although I never heard the reason. I don't want to say she was ousted. If you may contact her and she may say it's all fake, I just retired, but she was there one day and she was gone the next. And I knew many people in peacekeeping that were like, wow, it was a big power play. I wish I could tell you. I'm sure from the way I've described things, it seems like I know everything. This one was a mystery. It was a mystery to me. But there's definitely something there, because it wasn't like, I'm retiring, I'm moving on. There's a lot of shadowy business. So I would say track her down. And I think there are definitely... The funny thing about peacekeeping, I'm not at war with peacekeeping, but because the head guy is so bad, he literally on camera, he cut off the Malian foreign minister from answering my question. The guy's trying to answer my question. He says, non, on va pas répondre. It's like, who are you? So, it's difficult. A person you should get if you can get him. He's now making a lot of money. Tony Banbury, do you know that name? The guy who wrote, he was the assistant in peacekeeping of DFS. He left less than a year ago and wrote a self-described screaming op-ed in the New York Times against the way peacekeeping in the UN was run. Anthony Banbury. He's now with something called Vulcan, which is one of the Microsoft founders' humanitarian arms. Vulcan for Paul Allen, the guy who owns the Seahawks. So I don't know if he can make time for your seminar, as I did. But he's worth speaking to, because he knows where he knows where all the bodies are buried, and he'll tell you at least about some of them.
Oh, wow.
particularly about Darfur. He has a real bee in his bonnet for the mysterious Russian Armenian. Do you know this? There's an ongoing series of stories about some bad guy in Darfur to whom everything is blamed. And then I know people also in UNAMID who say he's the only guy who can get people released. This is, I mean, the UN is in a tricky spot, right? It's one of these things where it's easy to say, like, you're a Russian, you're in bed with Darfur. At the same time, you want to get people released. That's why I say, like, the people in the field, they have to make compromises. The top guy cannot be a self-interested, running for South Korean president, secrecy and censorship maven. And this is what we've come to at current.
Yeah, there's no angels. I mean, you've gone after Human Rights Watch. That's what
I have, actually. Do you know what? But for lack of transparency, I've asked them, again, I didn't expect to go after them. And this is what I say about my personality. But one day, they appeared on Ban Ki-moon's schedule. Ken Roth meeting with Ban Ki-moon. I said, great. I send them an email. I say, can you just tell me the issues you're going to raise? I think at that time I was really boned up about either Sri Lanka or it could be Burundi. And they said, no, to have these conversations be confidential, we don't speak about them. I said, I totally understand you not saying what Ban Ki-moon said, such as, screw you, whatever he said. But what you raise has to be public, right? Aren't you a nonprofit? Do you tell your funders? I'm sure they do. I'm sure they go back and have a meeting with their funders and say, we were in there with Ban Ki-moon, you know, we really told him what. But I said, you're in here because the public respects you. And the less transparent you are on the things you can be, then I'm losing some respect for you. And then I guess the feeling may well be mutual.
Oh, wait a minute. You keep... Okay.
Go ahead.
You keep talking. I just wonder if you have got advice or if you get advice to people like Palasta and Scale. I mean, where do they stand? I mean, they get a chance to do their books. They get a chance to publish and have a publisher back them up, whether they're going after Blackwater or whether they're going after somebody else. I mean, you know...
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to be self-defeatist. I'm trying to write something, so let's see. You know, it's. But I don't. I agree. There's always. You know, you look at something like The Intercept. I'm a huge fan. I see they've done some really great stories. So it's. I think I personally. I like ADD, I'm not sure, but I like covering like 10 issues a day. Like, I think in the case of Scahill, like, he became an expert on Blackwater. He got to know everything about it. I'm not saying I try to be superficial. I try to know everything about everything I'm working on, but I don't put things as, a lot of people say, why do you go to the noon briefing every day? You know, you're just bouncing around like a ping pong ball. Nobody else goes, but you know what it is? Every single day, by noon, there's at least 6 things I want to ask them about. Like, why are you silent on Ethiopia? Why was the dinner? You know, I like this, it suits my personality, but it may not suit sort of being kind of like he's the go-to guy on Blackwater, you know? I'm the go-to guy on Ban Ki-moon corruption, I can tell you. I get calls from South Korea, but it's just not a very big beat, you know?
Yeah.
I needed a bigger target. My you know, it's not even a target. I didn't choose it. It was thrust on me. Once as I found myself covering the UN from a park in front of it, I scratched my head and I said, you know, how did I get here? And I realized they didn't mind kind of like, tart questions about Darfur, about rapists. The moment I started asking, what about Ban Ki-moon's connection to this John Ash scandal? What about the head of the Department of Public Information having been found to do no due diligence, allowing the Chinese Macau-based businessman to have one-man art shows? Seriously, like somebody's father, one of his that had an art show in the UN. You come into the UN, you say, this art sucks. How did it get here? And you find out some guy just paid money. That scandal is so bad that the slavery memorial outside the UN General Assembly was paid for by the now indicted Chinese businessman. And the person who took his money is the person who signed the letter to throw me in the street. I got in trouble, and the media that took $12 million from the Macau-based businessman is sitting with an office unused. I don't even need an office. I just need a pass to be able to move around the building, but I can't have one because it's too dangerous, apparently. Somehow. I don't mean that, arrogantly. I mean, like, they think it's too dangerous.
Well, we're going to have some interesting conversations in the future. Let me pursue one now that the folks I work with on Darfur and so forth are interested in, and this is the puzzle of Samantha Power. It seems to have been totally disempowered, totally silent.
Yep.
I've got my own theories, but I wonder what you have.
I don't know. I agree. I actually thought the way that she had to kind of the limbo dance she had to do to get the position, I lost a little bit of respect for it. I don't know her that well. She's it's a superstar mentality. She really speaks very little with the press. I knew Susan Rice, for better and worse. Like, I actually knew her. I'd be sitting in front of the Security Council one of the only ones there on a Darfur meeting, and she'd come out and say, this guy. She was very anti-Sudan, and I knew the Sudan people, so it was like she was very approachable because I hate to say it, I feel like she really cared. Maybe it's a long history that she had. I don't know what to say except to say like she would actually speak about the issues. And Samantha Power has a spokesperson. She tweets a lot, so it's all very controlled. The mission is extremely controlled. I know that you're interested in Darfur, but I would say this Yemen thing is the key. It's a real low point for the Obama administration. Basically, to try to get Saudi support for the Iran nuclear deal, they allow them to kill more than 1,000 children, and they put themselves where the paragon of a problem from hell genocide is totally defanged on maybe not the greatest, but certainly the second greatest right now, like mass slaughter from the air. Not a word to say on it, and so you lose all credibility. And the problem is she seems like an independent academic, but she does have to. I'm sure she fights arguments in the cabinet, but when she's here, you cannot get a comment from her about. You can get a comment about Burundi. I got along with her for a brief period of time in which I was asking her about the youth wing of the ruling party of Burundi, and she was like, "This is a great question." But the moment you start asking about Yemen, it's like you're the enemy. You must be like anti-American, and it's like no. America would be better served stopping giving these weapons. Do you really want to be a country whose cluster bombs are blasting children? And the Houthis are not like, they're not, I'm not a defender of theirs, but these are, in many instances, like guys in sandals with like daggers, and some people will say that with, Iranian shoulder-to-air missiles, but they're definitely the underdog, and it's a real outrage what's been taking place there. I will say that. And so I'd like to hear your theory on Samantha Power. I may be too close to it to really see what's happened.
My theory on Samantha Power is twofold. One is that you remember she called Hillary Clinton a monster.
I do remember.
Once you do that and then get admitted into the administration where Clinton is serving, you are tamed. You are totally powerless. Nobody's going to listen to you.
Yep.
The two of them make this irresistible combination for somebody who's putting on a party in Washington. Absolutely.
Yeah. Star Wars, man.
Yeah, that's right. As far as I know. And so,
no, that's his book. He has a book about Star Wars, and he literally was like pitching it inside the UN.
Oh, jeez. Anyway, even Holbrook would go that far.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's for sure. Okay, listen. How are we going to contact you now? We're supposed to do it. What's this email situation? We use. What do we use? We go at Inner City Press.
On Twitter, it's at Inner City Press. It's innercitypress.com. It's matthew.lee at innercitypress.com. There are many ways. I'm actually here. I'll say this. These days, I'm doing Periscope broadcasts from the stakeout and sometimes ranting in front of the UN. So you'll hear it's a great, live broadcast streaming, but it works very well at the stakeout because increasingly, and this is a Samantha Power phenomenon as well, when I first got here, I caught the tail end of Bolton, Ambassador Bolton. He would come almost every day on his way into the Security Council. He would stop on the UN TV microphone. He would say, I just read the Wall Street Journal. This is an outrage. I'm demanding answers. And then he would go on. And it's like people got stories. It might be... Today, not just the U.S., nobody speaks on camera. Basically, your average Security Council meeting, the UK and France will speak off camera. Sometimes they're just reading notes. There's nothing impromptu about it. They step on the stairs on the way into the Security Council, and they say, I have 3 points to make. And they read the 3 points. And then people ask about those 3 points. And then as they go in, I shout out, what about Yemen? What about Burundi? And 1 time out of 4, they'll answer. The times that they don't, I come to this very booth and do a Vine 6-second video of them like, no comment, no comment. I mean, it gets kind of... But sometimes, as today, the French ambassador came back and he said, je ne veux pas vous oublier, or whatever. He gave a long answer on Burundi in French, and so I put it up. It's like, I don't necessarily believe what he said, but it's something, one thing I can say to myself, this, and that there are people, many of them in the diaspora of Burundi, but Burundians, that want to see it, and so I'm happy to do that. It's not a Jeff Scahill thing, though, that's for sure.
Look, I'm looking forward to seeing Ban Ki-moon and Hervé Ladsous appear on Saturday Night Live.
I do too. There's one other one. Here's a name you must remember. Christina Gayach, the head of DPI, not only threw the press in the street, not only put the UN art stuff up for sale, but is also responsible for naming as the UN's new Women's Empowerment Ambassador, Wonder Woman. It's happening October 21st. They couldn't find a real woman. They went with Wonder Woman. So, That's not. I'm not as outraged about that. That's like the one thing that's gotten the press corps here upset. But I'm sort of. And I know. Somebody sent me an email today who said, "What would Wonder Woman and her lasso of truth do with lassos?" So I think. So.
All right.
All right. Enough.
Thanks so much, Matt. This is just the beginning.
Okay. All right. Very good.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And there you have it. Academia at its finest. So this guy contacted me just yesterday, but he seems to run an ongoing UN history seminar at Cornell. So we'll see what comes of it. Hopefully, we tried to deal with why some of this anonymity in as diplomatic a form as possible, but it may not be diplomatic enough. But on that note,